world. So I know that's if Brian were here, he'd be like, no, don't teach my students this. They must do it well. So here we are. What do we do next? We are colliding with an enemy. This code is all just for handling the collision with the enemy. We don't care about anything else. So what I then do is I tell the enemy player to play its disintegrate animation. And again, I use the correct rotation of the to select the correct animation. And previously, when I created the enemy, I stored an angle, which was the angle that it was moving at. So I used that angle to play the correct rotation out of the sprite code, because, again, recall that we are not actually rotating our bodies. We're simply playing animations that look like they're rotating. Then I set a sprite listener, and this is kind of a cool thing. What I've done is I've said, start playing another animation, and I know that this animation plays and then we'll have an end phase. And so set up a listener on the sprite animation, and when the phase gets to ended, do something. In other words, play the animation once, then do something. This way you don't have to know how long that animation is. Another way people usually set this up is they play the animation, and then they use a timer, and then they do something. But the right way is to simply catch the last frame of the animation, which I'm doing here, and then call some function, whatever it is you want to do. And the function I want to execute is the delayed self-destruct, which is the code that we saw operating earlier that allowed us to pile these bodies up. And so when this code executes, it will stop the animation, do all the other stuff that's sort of redundant with our code above, and it'll let it sit there for 100 seconds, and then over the period of 1/2 second after that, it will fade out and then destroy the display object. And so we get this nice accumulation of bodies on the screen. A nice accumulation of bodies. Yes, it makes me sound like a psychopath. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's it.
Now, and I know you probably mentioned this before, but I'm seeing it sort of in action here. Go back to your pause game there.
Yes.
See how the physics body is below the actual arrow itself?
Right there, yeah. Let me pause that so you can see a little better.
But that doesn't seem to, yeah, that's a good example of it where it looks like it's to the right of the arrow. So
it's a little bit hard to see, but if you focus in here, you're going to see this part of the arrow that's rendered, and then you got the shadow. Don't forget that the animation for the arrow, or the sprite, is actually...
We covered this last time, right? We covered this last time because the center point of the image is actually between the arrow and the shadow.
Yeah, this is better. So we got a horizontal one here.
Nice.
So the arrow is in flight horizontally. We got the shadow below, seeming below. And then we got this one up and to the left. And the arrow is there, and there's a shadow. But in all cases, the body is going to be centered between those two graphics.
Yeah, because it's still a square graphic, if you will, or a rectangular graphic.
This would be like the square graphic on the screen. In fact, give me 2 seconds and I will demonstrate this perfectly.
Yeah, I just if somebody sees that, they're gonna be like, "What? Why is that?" And I know I definitely have, and we covered this last time. You explained it, but now it's sort of visually apparent. So.
You can offset the physical body over the actual image, right?
Yeah, and I think we did kind of cover that last time, and I think the response was basically that it would just take more calculations to do.
No, it won't. Well, a little in setup of the physics body.
Right.
Yeah, setting up the physics. I missed part of that because I was trying to show you the outline of the actual graphic. This is the actual outline of the graphic.
Yeah,
I basically set the stroke width, so now you can see it.
Which definitely helps because when I did notice that when you were going left and right, not left and right, or like up and down, the physics body seemed to be in the center of the image, right? But when it goes diagonally or left and right, it looks like it's offset from the arrow itself, which is.
Yeah, but the body itself is in the center of the
graphic
rectangle, always in the center of the rectangle.
Yeah.
So now if I'd made it the body to be a default body, it'd be as big as this rectangle, man, you'd never miss.
Right.
And I think what you guys were just talking about is the difficulty, the challenge of putting the physics body on the tip of the arrow. And it's not a significant challenge, but it's something that I would have to pre-calculate because I'd have to determine the location, the offset of that body for each of these actual images. Because in reality, every variant of this has the same shape. So I can be lazy and choose the center, which is the default. My body is centered about the body of the graphic. Or I could create a custom render shape for every instance of the arrow, which there are 16. And then I would have to offset it to be where the arrow head is for that particular graphic or that sprite. It's not a big deal. In fact, with Math 2D, I could easily just calculate an angle and an offset and rough it out basically where it is. It would be pretty close. But not going to do it because people would just look at that code and they'd be like, what are you doing? Why is
yeah. Because at this point, we're just trying to get people to understand the concepts. And like you said, or even demonstrated, the arrow, the gameplay seems to work pretty well as is.
Yeah. I feel like we said earlier, if you feel like the arrows are hitting too often, make the body smaller. If they're not hitting enough, make the body bigger.
Yeah, that's more of a fine-tuned conversation. So I think for now we're good. Yeah, I just saw that visual artifact and I was kind of like, maybe we better cover that.
So that's the deal.
Okay.
The dealio.
So that's that.
Oh yeah. So next week. All right. So I've been working hard and I got it real close. I'm not going to turn it on, but I'm sticking with the Lost Garden graphics for the Lost Garden graphics for the background for the terrain, and it's just elaborate. Let me just show it to you. They've got this guide. The guy who made these graphics has got this guide where the name parts are like the group, the tile type it's allowed to go next to, etc., etc. It's like all these different details, which makes it really hard to algorithmically place these if you're not 100% familiar with what all these things are. But I've been working on it, and I got it mostly working. So next week what we'll see a slightly more elaborate looking background, which is going to be algorithmically generated. The way it does that is we'll lay out block by block, and every time it lays out a block, it will say, what's the next block next to that I'm allowed to lay out that matches up the edges, that uses these rules in this document. And then that's the least exciting part. Next week we will also have pick up objects and objects in our scene that we will need to navigate around or avoid, etc., etc. So we're going to have a little bit more rich environment next week visually, and then we can start talking about pickups. And then that will lead to traps and solving levels and moving on to the next level, which will get us, I think, in a week or 2 or 3 to the point where we can put this game down and start thinking about a different kind of shooter.
Okay, so you want to maybe build another desktop shooter, or are you thinking about...
I think what I'd like to do is we talked about 2 possibilities. Taking this one and getting it to a certain point and then modifying it to use joystick, gamepad. And I think we should do that. I think we should take this one, get it to a certain point, and then use a gamepad or a joystick kind of a control scheme. And we can also introduce at that point teaching the users how to select at runtime which input scheme they're going to use. So go with a default mouse keyboard, but giving them a menu option that allows them to use a joystick instead. So some users could use joystick, others use mouse and keyboard, but the same game supports both, depending on what the user wants to do. But at the end of the day, I think I've said this before, I get bored after a while. And so I would like very much to take what we've learned here and do a freeform sort of twin stick shooter. So go through this to the point where we have pickups and traps and level-to-level navigation. Add on top of that, allowing users to use their gamepads or joysticks to navigate. and shoot. And then that will give us a good segue into a new game where we can use perhaps tiled for the layout, and so we can sort of backtrack a little bit and use some of the things we learned from our last game, builders and makers, and we use them here too. And then we can use tiled as the layout, so I don't have to show people how to do layout and deal with all that, and go to a twin stick shooter, which I think is a lot more interesting to some other folks. In fact, I know folks wanted to do that early on in this series.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. Because we try to cover, most of the exciting bits, right? I mean, the documentation is there. You can kind of look up different pieces of this and that and whatever. But we've always said that if you look at a game and go, how did they do that? That's probably the part that we want to talk about. So that's good. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want people to think, oh, we're ending this game before we get to the interesting bits. We're not.
Right.
Next week we introduce pickups and other elements in the game that are the driving factors. At this point, all we got is the player and the enemies and our arrows. Next week we start to get strategic by adding other elements.
Right. Of course, this could go on forever, right? I mean, you could.
Yeah, we could go on and on and on and do balancing and all that, but I don't want to go there because balancing is like even in a game, I don't know how long that would take doing it on a week-to-week basis.
Right. But it's enough to get someone up and running, and then they can take it from there and do all the fine-tuning.
I like to get people just far enough to take it apart and do whatever they want with it.
Okay. All right. Well, just as a reminder to everybody, go to youtube.com/coronageek. All the previous videos are there in this series, as well as all the other series that we've been doing. And we will have all the links in the show notes that we've talked about, which means you can go download the code for this, and like we've always encouraged, pick it apart and break it. If you get to a point where you don't know what you're doing anymore, you can always unzip the folder and start over. So do that and have fun with it.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks for. And do what?
And don't hate me too. They won't hate me. There's plenty of code. There's lots of stuff to dig through.
Yeah, and you've done a great job of commenting it and trying to make it self-documenting as well. So there you go. So thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back here next Monday, 12 p.m. Pacific, to talk all about mobile app development and desktop app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week and happy coding.
Adios.
Adios. Happy trails.